Hey, let me say this to you today. The bravest thing in the book of Daniel is not surviving the furnace. It is walking toward it crying. We talk about the miracle. We talk about the fourth figure. We talk about coming out without the smell of smoke. But nobody talks about the walk, the road between the arrest and the fire, the sand under their feet, the sound of the crowd watching, the heat already reaching them from 100 yards away. And three young men, far from home, tied together, moving towards something no human body was built to survive, crying, not because they had lost their faith, because they were human. And that is the sermon the church keeps skipping. Friends, brothers, or strangers. Let me ask you something nobody asks about this story. Were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego friends before Babylon? We do not know. The text does not tell us. What we know is that they were taken from Jerusalem together, carried to Babylon together, trained together, given new names together. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, Azariah became Abednego. Babylon gave them new names to erase who they were, to cut the thread back to Jerusalem, to make them Babylonian from the inside out. It did not work. Because what Babylon did not understand is that shared suffering creates something that shared comfort never can. These three men had lost the same things, the same city, the same temple, the same Sabbath rhythms, the same faces they would never see again, the same smell of home that had no address anymore. That kind of loss does not make you strong on its own. But when you find someone else carrying the exact same weight, something happens between you that no program, no small group, no church building can manufacture. You become family, not by choice, by suffering. And that is what these three men were to each other long before the furnace. Family made by grief. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 1, it says, Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura. Think about that for a moment. In Daniel chapter 2, God had shown the king a statue with a head of gold and told him that Babylon was the gold, but that other kingdoms would follow, and eventually God's kingdom would end them all. And Nebuchadnezzar's response was to build a statue made entirely of gold. All gold, no silver, no bronze, no iron, no clay. He was saying, I heard what God showed me, and I reject the ending. I will not be replaced. My kingdom will not fall. Everything will be gold. Everything will be Babylon, forever. And then he commanded everyone, every official, every ruler, every person of any authority in the empire, to bow when the music played. Everyone bow or burn. That is the same command being prepared for our generation. Different music, same choice. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You are tied to the person next to you, not metaphorically, with rope, your wrists bound together, walking in a line like cattle being led somewhere they do not want to go. The sun is brutal on the plain of Dura. The crowd lines the road. Some of them are watching with curiosity, some with satisfaction. Some cannot meet your eyes. And ahead of you, the furnace, already burning, already so hot that the soldiers assigned to throw you in will die from the heat before they can walk away. You can smell it from here, and somewhere in that walk, maybe it was Hananiah who spoke first. Maybe it was Mishael. Maybe it was Azariah. We do not know. But someone started talking about God, not performing, not preaching for the crowd, just reminding each other of what was written, of who held the next chapter, of every time God had shown up when there was no way out. And the tears came, not tears of doubt, tears of everything they were carrying, the grief of home, the weight of loss, the ache of being far from everything familiar and walking toward fire with your hands tied. And somewhere on that walk, the fear left. Not because the furnace went cold, not because an angel appeared early, not because God sent them a sign, because they surrendered the outcome, fully, completely, without negotiation. The next chapter was in his hands, and it was too expensive to think about anything else. By the time they reached the furnace door, they were ready, not rescued yet, just ready. And that readiness, that quiet, tear-stained, grief-soaked surrender is the thing the church has almost completely forgotten how to teach. So before they reached the furnace, the king gave them one more chance. In Daniel chapter 3, verse 15, Nebuchadnezzar says, "If you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" That is the oldest question in the world. What God will rescue you from my hand? And their answer, in Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, is one of the most extraordinary statements in all of Scripture. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. He will rescue us from your hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Even if he does not. 3 words that contain the entire gospel. They were not claiming a promise of rescue. They were not naming and claiming their miracle. They were not declaring that God would save them. They were saying whether he does or whether he does not, we already decided. That is not faith as a transaction. That is faith as a person. That is not trusting God for an outcome. That is trusting God himself. And that kind of trust, the kind that holds even when the answer might be no, is the rarest thing on earth. Here's the thing. He looks into the furnace, the one burning 7 times hotter than normal, the one that killed the soldiers who threw them in, and he sees something that should not be there. In verse 25, he says, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." 4 men. 3 went in. 4 are walking. The ropes that bound them burned away. Not them, just the ropes. And the 4th figure. Who was it? The text does not give a name, but throughout Scripture, every time a figure appears in human form doing what only God can do, walking with Abraham, wrestling with Jacob, standing with Joshua, the pattern is the same. God does not send a representative into the fire. He goes himself. And here is what stops me every time. He was already there before they arrived. He did not rush in when they needed rescuing. He was in the furnace waiting for them, which means every furnace you have ever walked into, he was already there, waiting. Nebuchadnezzar approaches the furnace door and calls them out. And in Daniel chapter 3, verse 27, it says, "The fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Not a hair, not a thread, not a smell. The only things the fire destroyed were the ropes." Think about that. The thing that bound them, burned away. The thing that was them, untouched. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king who built the statue of gold to defy God's prophecy, the king who said what God will rescue you from my hand, stands at the furnace door and says in verse 28, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Willing to give up their lives." The king understood what happened on that walk better than most sermons ever will. They were willing. Before the rescue, before the miracle, before the 4th figure appeared, they were already willing. That willingness, that surrender before the outcome is known, that is what moved the king. Not the miracle, the surrender. Yup, you heard that right, surrender. Now I want to talk to you directly for a moment. If you are watching this tonight, you are somewhere on that walk. Maybe you know exactly what your furnace is, the thing coming toward you that you cannot survive on your own, the choice being placed in front of you that has a cost you cannot fully calculate. Maybe you do not know yet, but you can feel the heat from here. And the question the church often gets wrong is this: the goal is not to avoid the furnace. The goal is to walk in with someone already waiting on the other side. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not come out of that fire because they were brave enough. They came out because they were surrendered enough. And surrender, real surrender, the kind that says, even if he does not, I have already decided. That does not happen at the furnace door. It happens on the walk, in the ordinary, in the quiet, in the Friday nights when the music is playing and everyone around you is bowing and you have to decide who you are before the heat reaches you. The ropes that bound them burned away. The fire did not touch them, and he was already there waiting. He is already in whatever furnace has your name on it, waiting. Next week, we look at the most haunting moment in the entire book of Daniel. A hand appears out of nowhere and writes on the wall of the most powerful party in history, and every person in the room goes silent. If this spoke to you tonight, share it with one person, not for the channel, because someone you know is on that walk right now, and they need to know they are not walking alone. What is written, what is coming, what you need to choose. See you Friday.